Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. Our show is a production of the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation and our affiliated political committee, the Campaign for the Restoration and Regulation of Hemp. We have a great show for you tonight. We have author Ann Saker here to talk about the funeral of Jack Hare that happened last week. Welcome to the show, Ann.
Thank you, Paul.
And we have Mr. Tim Pate over here, ready to play us some music, and we have some music that we will be playing during the show as well. And we'll be taking your phone calls via telephone here in Portland and also via the internet through our ustream.tv live streaming from throughout the world. So stay tuned as we bring out our infamous Dancing Cannabis Leaves.
I feel the force.
All right, and here's Mr. Tim Pate. How are you this week, Tim?
Oh, I am doing very fine. I am. Although it's been 3 weeks since we've been on live here on the show on Cannabis
We've
Common
been doing
Sense.
live shows out there and throughout Oregon on the John Trudell Hemp is Earth Medicine Tour.
That's right. We were on the internet on that several times. That was really a fun
I'm
tour.
sure even though we missed the funeral of Jack Hare, we were there in spirit. I know you particularly had played to him for a good number of days consecutively once he revived from his coma after his massive heart attack at our Hempstock Festival last year.
It's been a long journey. Jack proved to all of us that he was to the last minute a fighter. He surprised us every day that he was still with us, and I was very pleased to have known him. It was an honor to know him. Tonight, in his honor, I'm going to do some music, obviously, but I'd like to read something that he wrote a long time ago. This was his 1994 edition of The Emperor Wears No Clothes. It's my own personal copy. He said to Tim, "You're a true believer." This was in Eugene at a hemp rally back in 1994. "You're a true believer of hemp. My advice is to spread the comprehensive knowledge of hemp every day in every way to everybody, over and over and over until we win. Love, Jack." And as I've read over this book over the years, and I thought about all of the things that I could say, or we should say, or we can say about Jack Hare. I think I just want to say what he said. This is from Jack Hare in 1993. The dedication to Edwin, Captain Ed M. Adair III. Born October 29, 1940, died August 16, 1991 of leukemia. Father of Scarlett, Robin, and Marsh. My teacher, partner, and friend. Remember, this is Jack talking. The bravest freedom fighter and the most honorable man for all humankind I've ever known. He taught many of us how to save the earth from ourselves and had to laugh at and yet love its enemies. After California decriminalized under an ounce of hemp and pot in 1974-75, when he was 33 years old and I was 34, Captain Ed and I took a pledge. Virtually everyone in the pot movement in California thought we'd already won. They drifted away from the movement and went back to their lives, thinking the battle was over and we'd won, and that the politicians would clean up the loose ends. Captain Ed didn't trust politicians to get the job done, and he was right. Ed's pledge that I took in 1974, and again in April 1980, and 1986, and 1988, and finally in the hospital 4 days before he died in August 1991, was that we'd swear to work every day until pot was legal. We were dead, or we turned 84, when we would quit. When we first pledged that pledge, it was 50 years away. We thought then that the battle would be over in 6 months, 2 years at the most. He gave us and me, hemp, as one of mankind's most honorable and most important saviors. I vow to continue the fight and ask Californians and all Americans to join us. October 7th, 1993. I can honorably say to Jack Hare, you lived that good fight to the day you died, sir. You certainly did live up to your vow. This is for you.
Thank you, Tim.
So long, Jack.
Mr. Tim Pate. Well, welcome to the show, Ann.
Thank you very much, Paul.
So you were down at Jack's funeral here just last weekend.
That's correct.
Yeah, and so I had been invited by his son, Mark Hare, but it happened right in conjunction with our kicking off our Octave petition tour. So I know Jack would have wanted me to do that. There's no doubt about that. Work for the cause. So the show must go on, as they say, and we did that. So, but how did that go?
I have rarely had an opportunity. I've covered a lot of funerals. I've written about a lot of lives, and it's unusual to have a moment in time where you actually can see someone placed in his historical context. There were a lot of people who, from all over the movement, from all over the world,
I saw that in the
came
photos.
to this event, and it coincided with the THC expose at the Convention Center in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
and
that was fortuitous.
the contrast was stark. You had the past and the present of the movement gathering for the funeral, sharing war stories, telling lots of Jack stories, doing a lot of laughing and crying and sharing the moments. And on the other hand, you had this huge expo downtown where there were more than 300 vendors from all over the world showing what the future holds for the movement. And it was quite a revelation to me to see these two things
Kind of a
lined up next to
juxtaposition
exactly.
of the past and present.
Exactly.
I see. Yeah, I saw a good number of activists I could recognize in there. I noticed Chris Conrad gave a little speech as he helped throw a little bit of dirt on the grave. I saw Gatewood Galbraith from Kentucky there, and
It was an extraordinary...
Donnie Wirtschafter from the Ohio Hempery, and many others.
Correct. It was quite a parade of people. Richard Marsala, Richard Eastman, the guy, you know, like George Clayton Johnson,
Yeah.
Valerie Corral. There was just the whole, all these folks who've been standing and marching next to each other for 20 and 30 years, a lot of whom had not seen each other in a while. So it was both joyous and sorrowing, but it was an interesting blend to feel the emotion that was running through people there. It was the ceremony itself could not have been on a more picture-perfect Southern California day, sunshine, not even that much haze in the valley. And the chapel held about 350 people. It was, of course, full. And there were probably another 350 people standing outside with listening to loudspeakers. And of course, the ceremony was streamed on the internet live, so people around the world could participate in it. The front of the chapel had large photographs that had been taken by some family members over the years, and also by Dan Skye, the editor of High Times magazine. The famous pictures, of course, that have been republished and have been on the covers. You've seen them all with the Santa and the Forrest Hemp photograph and all the iconic images that have been associated with Jack over the years. We're in the front, we're in the front of the chapel, and they had 5 official speakers, Gatewood Galbraith, Chris Conrad, J.J. Greenfields, I'm blanking on one now, and of course Dan Harrer, his second son. And but to me, I thought the most moving speech of all was one that was given extremely offhandedly by his 16-year-old granddaughter, Hannah, who came to the microphone and said, "Thank you very much for telling me about my grandfather. I didn't really know him very well. I didn't see him very often. But whenever I did, I got lots of slobbery kisses and a $100 bill." And that, of course, brought the house down, because it took a lot of courage for her to stand up and speak from the heart like that. So it was full of moments like that, and he's buried on this beautiful hilltop in this cemetery, surrounded by the mountains, gorgeous, and people stood around until 4:20, of course, and toasted him in the customary way at that hour. As the rabbi finished saying the Kaddish, Dan Harrer, his son, stood up and said, "I know this is kind of a silly thing to ask, but does anyone have a joint?" And sure enough, the crowd all said, "Ah!" And all of a sudden, the urn is pelted with joints and loose weed. And Sharon Cohen, an activist from Eugene, who had driven all the way down, brought a jar of hemp seed, the kind you snack on here, and poured it into the grave. And so it felt, in fact, Mark Harrer remarked, it's a hemp festival. There were kids who had brought their dogs. There was someone with a baby. It was a very lively atmosphere there that you all are no doubt familiar with.
I'm sure Jack would have enjoyed it very much.
There were many people saying that very same thing. And after 420 was commemorated, everyone stood in a big circle and prayed the Om. And in that place, at that moment, it vibrated. It was very intense. It was quite remarkable to witness.
That's
great.
we
can Om with the best of them.
It was quite a remarkable moment to witness, because you had this juxtaposition with the hemp festival, with the THC Expo downtown, and this moment here where there was a lot of emotion, but a lot of people talking about what they now had to do. That Ed Rosenthal wrote this week, mentioned Moses not being able to cross the River Jordan, and I think that's probably an apt metaphor. And the message that people kept giving over and over at the funeral was, we need to step forward and move to the next level. And there were political speeches about the California initiative at the gravesite, which I'm sure is something that Jack probably would have encouraged. I never met him, and I think to some degree that was an advantage to me, going down there, because I wasn't in mourning. So I could witness what was happening with, I think probably, I wouldn't say objectivity, but with a certain remove. And it was really quite exceptional. I would dare anyone to have gone through that experience and not feel that that a moment has come, and that there was a sacredness about that experience on that hilltop that I think everyone felt.
You know, the way Jack went out, the day he was there, you know, because Tim and I and everybody at the hemp stock was there for that. And when he had his massive heart attack back on September 12th last year at our hemp stock festival, he had just left the stage giving a very rousing speech about legalizing marijuana and how good hemp is for your body and for the environment, and his typical bombastic style, and how he didn't want to see one dime of taxes go to the U.S. federal government that had been putting us in prison all these years. And that was the gist of his speech. And as he ended it, he said, "Come over to my booth and I'll see you next time." So we look forward to seeing him next time.
Right.
You know, I first met Jack in 1982. I was just barely 22 years old and went down to Los Angeles ostensibly at a break at Evergreen State College, the summer break. I'd taken the summer quarter, and I had about 5 weeks before I had to go back. And so I went down and tried to get on trivia game shows because I'm really quite trivial. I can answer those off the wall. I know a little bit about everything and a lot about nothing, you know. And so but I went down there and first stayed in a hotel a couple days and spent a week at a KOA campground. But I was a contact in this magazine from New York City put out by the Yippies, a la Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, called Overthrow. And I'd written some articles in it. It was a contact, and I looked up in L.A., and here were the Reefer Raiders in L.A. Wow. So I gave them a call and came to a shop on Van Nuys Boulevard called Heads and Highs. And they said, "Oh, don't stay at the campground. Come here and stay in our blacklight room in the back of this shop." And then I met Captain Ed there. He said, "Yeah, you can stay here. And, you're working your contact, okay." And so I lived there for about 3 weeks. And just as I was ready to leave, I found a job actually working for Tom Hayden, registering voters in front of the Santa Monica DMV for $1.50 a Democratic pop, which made pretty good money back in that day. But the last day I was there, I said bye to Captain. He said, "Well, you've got to come meet Jack." So I went over about a mile and a half down Van Nuys Boulevard. Van Nuys Boulevard was a strange place there in the early 80s. They would close down the whole street every night at about 6 o'clock till 2 or 3 in the morning, and to stop the cruisers from going up and down. Oh, wow. And Jack's high country shop was just off of Van Nuys, about half a block. And I met with him, and we went out to dinner and talked about the Oregon Initiative Drive. And neither one of us had met anyone involved with it, but he'd been involved in the California Initiative Drive. And there had been media just that week how the Oregon campaign had failed to make the ballot after, turning in a little bit more of the necessary signatures. And I left, and that was what I thought was, he gave me a copy of his book, Grass, a way to his first book. It was kind of a cartoon book on how to grade cannabis on a scale of 1 to 10 in consideration of the old Mexican and Colombian gold days, before the advent of domestically grown sensimilla. But then I came here to Oregon in 1984 and worked on the Oregon Marijuana Initiative, and I saw a picture, a cartoon on the wall. I looked at it and I said, "That's Jack Hare." And it was, and about 2 or 3 weeks later he was there, and shortly after that moved to Oregon to help the Marijuana Initiative from 1985 to 87. And then he wanted to open this head shop on Hawthorne called The Third Eye. And I didn't really want to get involved in that, but he got some other people involved with it. It's still run by his family here today, The Third Eye at 41st and
Captain Ed's children, too.
Yeah, Captain Ed's children and Jack's children now. I know Mark Harrer, his son, has been managing it, I believe,
What do you remember about that first meeting with him? What struck you about him?
Well, he was just his personality and his outgoingness and his verbosity and his passion. Those were the things I remember the most. And he took me and this other fellow out to dinner. We were poor young guys there, and we talked about legalization. He was obviously dedicated to that.
Was there good marijuana involved?
Well, yeah, there was a little bit of marijuana involved in his shop in the back room before we went out to dinner, and once we got back, I believe. But and then when he came here to Oregon, he moved in just a block and a half away from me, right off of 34th and Hawthorne. And after a few months, the first time I'd seen what's today the book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, it was an article in the Overthrow magazine called the CMI white paper. CMI was the California Marijuana Initiative. And it was about a 3-page, and that's the first I'd heard about industrial hemp. And then he talked more about it, and some local people helped him compile a bunch of information. And this was in the day before computers. So it was all cut and paste to put everything together. And so he had 3 young children that were between 2 and 7 at the time, Cece, Chancey, and BJ. And they, you can't keep big stacks of paper in order around a bunch of children. And I didn't have any children at the time. So he needed a place to compile all his papers and everything. And he asked if he could come over to my house since I was only a block and a half away. And so he came to my house for about a month and took over with stacks of papers and everything. He and Carolee Wilson and Bryce Garner, a couple of people who managed the Third Eye for a number of years. And then I was in the dedication of that first edition, and I did a lot of research on it, and I through the Portland State University Library, not the font of, you know, library breadth and depth, I found these books published by the U.S. Library of Congress that were complete copies of all the correspondences, incoming and outgoing, of Washington on the 200th anniversary of his birth, and Jefferson on the 200th anniversary of his birth, and Franklin. And I just went to, these are 20 to 30 tomb book collections. And I went to the index volume and looked up hemp. And then I just looked up all the citations based on that. And I found a whole breadth of things that people didn't, that no one really knew in our movement. We all knew the quote about that Washington had made, take the hemp seed and sow it, make the most of it and sow it everywhere. That was a quote that was already out there. But all the other ones found in that book, basically I found at the PSU library. And it became the whole final chapter of Chris Conrad's book, Hemp Lifeline to the Future. He edited Jack's book. At first, Bryce Garner and Carolee Wilson helped him on the first couple of editions. Then a lady, Ellen Comp, helped on it for a couple of editions. Then Chris Conrad edited probably 4th through 8th edition or something like that. And then he wrote his own book, Hemp Lifeline to the Future. But he intertwined a bunch of my quotes that I'd found at PSU, finding that Thomas Jefferson invented a device to process hemp fiber and corresponded with Gouverneur Morris, who, according to James Madison, who we consider the father of the Constitution, Madison said, the style and finish of the U.S. Constitution belongs properly to the pen of Gouverneur Morris. Anyway, Morris wrote a paper called Notes Respecting Tobacco that he checked with Jefferson, and Jefferson edited and made some suggestions on. And one of the quotes in that was a comparison between cannabis and tobacco. And in that, they concluded that cannabis or hemp is at all times to be preferred to tobacco. And numerous other quotes like that, you know, and it all, you know, gradually we formed a larger and larger base of knowledge. Jack went to Washington, D.C. I went back there a number of times in the early 90s too and met with some of the hip tour people at national normal conferences. But he found this USDA film that it was supposedly he'd heard about and the government denied it existed, but he found it in a box in a obscure site in the Library of Congress that is Hemp for Victory. It was a USDA film, U.S. Department of Agriculture film, reintroducing hemp for cultivation during World War II. And we've shown that on our show many times. But there's my little bit of my reminiscence. It was a shame to see Jack fall, but we know that the day he fell at that hemp stock, he was doing what he loved, surrounded by the people he loved. And,
right.
You know, from this point forward, our main stage will always be the Jack Herer Memorial Stage at Hempstock, and that's going to be a main theme of our Hempstock Festival. And we'll be there on September 12th. In fact, National Normal is going to do their national conference here in Oregon this year for the second time. The first time was back in 1986. But they'll have their conference on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, September 9th, 10th, and 11th, and our Hempstock Festival is September 11th and 12th. Of course, we are planning a memorial there at the moment he fell behind the stage after speaking this year too. And we're going to talk to the city about erecting a permanent plaque or some sort of memorial at Kelly Point Park to immortalize, you know, that this was where Jack Hare fell and gave his last speech just shortly after that.
It's quite remarkable for someone certainly at any age, but at age 70,
He was 70.
A stroke recovery victim, absolutely tireless. People around him have told me that it shocked them how much energy he had, even in his compromised condition. So it was quite, kind of amazing just to know that he was there at all.
Yeah, especially given, for a number of years he couldn't speak, and he slowly relearned that. He was in there, he just couldn't, after the stroke, control his body properly. And we have a few photos of Jack here. Maybe we'll get camera 2 to come close in on them. One over here right by Ann is of Jack at our Hempstock Festival just minutes before his, well, here, we're looking at these two. This is a close-up and an inset of the same picture. So here you see Jack Hare speaking on August 16th at the Seattle Hemp Fest. And here he's talking to over 100,000 people at about 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. And that was his last opportunity to speak at the Seattle Hemp Fest. Here we see a close-up there, and we like to show the close-up because here he has his Oregon Cannabis Tax Act pin on his hat. If you go over to this other one, next door, I was pointing at the wrong one initially here.
Paul,
we go.
What were Jack's objections to the OCTA?
He was against taxing marijuana, but he didn't really have, he was in favor of it because it was going to allow people to grow their own. And that's why he's wearing this pin here, supporting it. And he came on our show many times talking about that. He didn't want a federal tax on marijuana, but he didn't object to the state making some tax and making some revenue. But he didn't want a tax to be on individual cultivation. And he didn't want a limit on the THC content in industrial hemp. And I believe those are the proper and correct thing. And I have shepherded and guided the drafting of OCTA over a period of 2 decades, and we meet those requirements. We specifically say that the strains of industrial hemp that will be cultivated will be those that produce the most and the best fiber, protein, and oil, and that people can cultivate their own and even breed cannabis without a license. They only have to get a license to sell the flowers of cannabis. And so he had an objection to federal taxes, and he had an objection to some of the bills put forward in California, and preferred his own model, which was more akin to the California regulation of wine. But he supported OCTA. As you can see, here he is giving a speech to 100,000 people with his pin on his hat, signaling his support. And then over here, on the next picture over, we'll see him on the stage just, it's right over here.
Other way.
Yeah, the other way. He's on the stage at the at our Portland Hempstock Festival just 5 or 10 minutes before he had that massive heart attack. And then when he had the heart attack, we performed CPR for over 20 minutes while we were waiting for the emergency personnel to arrive. And then they took him out of the treed area and life-flighted him to a hospital. And revived him after he was in a coma for a few days, but he never recovered the ability to speak or eat or control himself. And but he fought for a long, long time. Anyway, we'd like to, we miss Jack. And we have a little song out there that was played at our Hemp is Earth Medicine tour that Tim and I just got back from. And then here's Mr. Jim Matheson. In fact, Jim also lost a very good family member, his close wife and best partner, Cher Parker. And the Seattle Hemp Fest stage is named in her honor, as the Cher Parker Memorial Stage. So here you can see in this photo, here is Jack on the Seattle Hemp Fest stage, but this picture at the bottom is Cher Parker. There it is, Cher Parker. Jim Matheson's. And then over here, we see our Portland, the other far side. This is a little tricky for camera too. We see Jack on the Portland Hempstock stage, and right behind him, there is Jim Matheson, Cher Parker's partner, and he went on our Hemp is Earth Medicine tour and played every venue, and here's a song that he sang.
Oh, right
For no other reason, just to try to fulfill a dream that Jack had. He's not here with us now. Here's for you, Jack. Lord knows I miss you. I miss you. Oh, how I miss you. I remember the time back when you played on the line. Such a fine time. I miss you. Lord knows I miss you. I miss you. Oh, now I miss you. I remember the day, the day you went away. Wasn't nothing we could pray. It just had to be that way. I miss you. Lord knows I miss you. I miss you. Oh, now I miss you.
$35,000 on the tour.
Thank you. Yeah,
It's been on
Jack.
Let them go ahead. They've started it. What the
A
heck?
little country western song. This is the way a country western should be sung. Well, here's a little song that you might get along with, all about natural seed. Growing wild by the side of the roadway, it's nature's a wonderful weed. Been around so long, it's hard to tell why anyone would think it's new. Love it or hate it, however you relate it, I'll leave that up to you. But isn't that righteous? And isn't that good enough? Ain't that the way it ought to be that I hallucinate that it was he there? Isn't that righteous? And isn't that good enough? Righteous is good enough for me. Now the same people that are spreading the fear, the same people that scare me the most. You know, some of them look like they just as soon like to hang you from a lamppost. They talk about what it does to your brain. Well, I just have to react, because Hitler never touched the stuff, and that's an actual fact. And isn't that righteous? Isn't that good enough? Ain't that the way it ought to be? Isn't that righteous? And isn't that good enough? Righteous is good enough for me. Now history's locked in a cardboard box and it's hard to take a look. With sidetrack thrills and fantasies all written all over the book. Everybody's got they've got their reasons why. You gotta pick reality up by the scruff of the neck and look it right in the eye. Isn't that righteous? Isn't that good enough? Ain't that the way it ought to be? Isn't that righteous? Isn't that good enough? Righteous is good enough.
All right, that is Mr. Jim Page and the stage of, oh, we've got some kind of technical difficulties out there. Hey, it looks like our CGs, or character graphic generator, has been recycling a few times there. Well, anyway, I want to welcome you folks back to the show. That was Jim Page singing his Cannabis song. Jim Page will be playing this year's Cannabis, our Hempstock Festival, and as will Jim Matheson, who played beforehand. And we have a phone call. Let's see if they're still standing by after all this time. Hello, caller. You're on our show.
Hey, boss. Am I on the air?
You are. Thanks for being patient.
Hey, thanks for the party last Saturday, and see you all tomorrow.
Well, great. Yeah, we have our march tomorrow. Thanks for bringing that up. We haven't touched on that yet, but the Global Marijuana March, which happens simultaneously in over 300 different cities. Tomorrow will be Portland's 11th annual Global Marijuana March. So I look forward to seeing you down there again. Thanks for coming to the benefit last week. Both of those songs were played there, as you probably recall.
Yeah. And I'll be the guy with the Primo Bud sign. Hey, vote for Octa is a vote for freedom. Anyway,
There you go.
I'm a union electrician who has to take drug tests in order to keep my job.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently when I joined a brotherhood, I didn't really realize what kind of brotherhood it was.
Mm-hmm. Brotherhood of the Circle of P or something.
Yeah, Nazi Brotherhood is what I keep thinking, but anyway.
Yeah.
Here's hoping they get better. Anyway, if Octa passes, I'm still going to have to take drug tests, I guess, because they're currently allowed to do it because it's a federal law.
Yeah,
That's
well,
the question.
actually, you know, one thing that they talk about the federal law, and there is a federal law prohibiting possession of marijuana, though, is that there is a section of the federal law that says state law trumps federal law. It's 21 U.S.C. 903. That's the Controlled Substances Act is Title 21 in the United States Code. So 21 U.S.C. Section 903. And that says explicitly that state regulation of drugs supersedes federal regulation, and that if the state law conflicts with federal law, state law trumps federal law. And that's why the feds haven't really been able to successfully prosecute anyone who holds a state license, because they haven't even attempted it because of that sanction in the federal law.
Yeah, well, you just
that doesn't help you in your union company and the piss tests and the Oregon Supreme Court just ruled they can fire you because of federal drugs, workplace safety.
Yeah, according to the news blurb, it was just because the guy had a license. He hadn't even tested positive for it. He got fired just because he had the license.
That's correct.
The medical marijuana card.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I believe that was the case. I haven't read the ruling. Have you read anything about that, Ann?
I have not.
I haven't read it. It came down just last week, but it basically reiterated the same results of the Washburn versus Columbia Forest Products case of about 3 years ago, which basically says medical marijuana patients don't have any rights to be free from being fired for using cannabis, even if it's during non-working hours and with no impairment on the job.
There was a split decision. The Supreme Court wasn't unanimous in that decision, and I believe.
Well, thank goodness for that. I'd be interested in reading the dissenting, if there was a dissenting opinion.
There were multiple dissenting, and so I feel like that there is a real possibility that can change in time. Given the right circumstances.
Do you think there are some federal issues here that could move this case to the federal side that could be addressed, that might cover all states that would have these programs and all workers in these states with programs?
A number of the state laws, Rhode Island, Michigan, Maine, Colorado, they say explicitly that having a medical marijuana card and using medical marijuana and testing positive cannot be used as a basis for firing. But Oregon's law doesn't include that provision, and neither does California's. and neither does Washington. And up and down the West Coast, all three of the state courts have to date ruled that the medical marijuana patient has no rights to employment, basically, or can be fired for using marijuana. It seems that it shouldn't be legal, but somehow we live in a corporate country, and the interests of business are the ones that buy the politicians, and that's why I think that so far they've prevailed.
Have there been efforts in the Oregon legislature to address this particular issue?
We've lobbied on that, and there have been proposals, but to date none of them have gone through legislatively. Are there any other issues you'd like to address, sir?
Here's hoping that you keep up your efforts, and
thank you.
Once OCTA passes, maybe you guys can get around to getting to me, my rights.
Yeah, it will change everything when it's legal for adults to use it, and people will. I can see the use of alcohol and tobacco will decline, and of other illegal substances will decline as people can get cannabis.
When I decide I'm able to use weed, I'm not using any of that other crap.
Yeah.
And here's hoping that last I heard, they're re-evaluating where to put marijuana on the pharmaceutical.
Yeah, the Oregon Board of Pharmacy will have a hearing on May 18th here in Portland at the Oregon building at 800 Northeast Oregon Street to talk about their plan based on the legislative directive of Senate Bill 728 that passed last July. They were ordered to reschedule marijuana from Schedule 2 to 5. Marinol, synthetic THC, is Schedule 3, so it has to be rescheduled out of Schedule 1 to between Schedule 2 to 5, and that means that it can be prescribed through pharmacies, even though the Board of Pharmacy isn't going to set up any means to produce it and supply it to pharmacies. We have, our initiative does set up that mechanism. So the OCTA would solve the problem of pharmacies not having a cannabis supply, and it directs it to be sold at cost to medical patients, at farmers' cost to medical patients, so that patients will be getting very low-cost cannabis.
Well, I'm hoping that it gets rescheduled clear down to over-the-counter. And
that's where it should be.
Hopefully they can do the same.
It's non-toxic, and you can't overdose on it, and it helps fight cancer, and basically, it shouldn't be treated like a narcotic because it isn't one. So I agree wholeheartedly. But thank you for your call.
Maybe they can do something about get it rescheduled federally too, with all this.
They're working on it. We're working on it. It's going to take a little
sir.
bit of time.
You're
I know that it's an incremental process in our system with all the checks and balances. Sometimes that's a good thing. In this case, it's not. But we will keep up the good fight.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'd also like to announce, that we have our Oregon Cannabis Tax Act to completely legalize marijuana. And about 2 weeks ago, 13 days ago, we launched our volunteer petition campaign. And I'm happy to announce that I can now say we're launching our paid petition campaign. So we're immediately putting 20 paid petitioners out on the street and going to hire another 20 or so in the coming few weeks. And ramping up the paid petition campaign to coordinate with our volunteer effort to put this thing on the ballot, to end adult marijuana prohibition, restore industrial hemp, and help medical marijuana patients this year, so that in 8 short months, marijuana, if we can pass OCTA, will be legal here in Oregon.
Right on.
We have another phone caller. Hello, caller. Welcome to our show.
Hi. I'm calling wondering, how do you, if you're moving to another state, like, say, Washington, how do I go about getting my card up there from Oregon?
There are many doctors up there willing to help you, and we have doctors we can refer you to. Just give us a call at the number there on your screen. If you're outside the Portland area, call 800-723-0188. That's 1-800-723-0188. If you are in the Portland area, you can call us at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. So I hope that helps.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are online, and we have solicited a few questions, and there are some here. One of them is saying, I can't get a medical card in Washington. What do you say about using something like spice herb? I don't know what spice herb is. Apparently that's some other product out there. But if you have a medical condition in Washington State, just like we told this person, you can call that toll-free number, 1-800-723-0188. Again, that's 1-800-723-0188. The phone number, we have an office up in Seattle and see Washington patients in Port Angeles, Bellingham, Olympia, Seattle, Bellevue, Spokane, and Kennewick. So we're seeing patients in all of those cities all across the state of Washington. Our next question's from Klamath Falls. What happens if we don't get enough signatures, Paul? Well, then we won't vote on it, and we'll go to work for 2012. So if we don't get enough signatures, we won't make the ballot, and it won't be voted on. So we need to get enough signatures to make the ballot, and that's what we're working on. To get involved in that, you can actually go online if you're in Oregon, and get registered Oregon voters to sign our petition. Just to sign it yourself, or you fill out. You can print that directly from our website, cannabistaxact.org. That's cannabistaxact.org. Or if you want to get other people to sign it, you have to fill out the volunteer form. That's right there next to the single petition form at the top of the web page at cannabistaxact.org. And once you've filled out that volunteer form, then you'll be able to print out the petitions to gather signatures on the Cannabis Tax Act. You just have to get only registered Oregon voters can sign the petition. They don't have to be in any specific county. They can sign one sheet and for every county throughout the state of Oregon, and then get those petitions turned into our office at 5220 Northeast Davis here in Portland, and that address is on the internet. We have another phone call. Hello, welcome to the show.
Hi, I was calling concerning climatic. What's the preferred climate for the growing of industrial hemp? I didn't know which climates led themselves best for the production of industrialized hemp.
You know, hemp grows in almost every climatic zone from subarctic down to tropical, and it produces more biomass, more fiber, protein, and oil per land area than any other crop in the temperate and cooler climates. There are some higher fiber yield crops in the tropics. They don't produce protein and oil like cannabis hemp does. And so deep soil works well, but I've seen stands of hemp growing in a foot of water in China. I've seen it growing from the Himalayas to the coastal region, all across China, and I've also seen it growing all across Europe and Switzerland. So hemp grows in almost every climate. In fact, it's native and indigenous to the high Himalaya country in Central Asia, in Nepal and Tibet and Kashmir in India and Afghanistan. That's where hemp originally came from, and then about over 5,000, perhaps over 12,000 years ago, its cultivation spread to the first agricultural settlements in the Yellow River Valley or the Huanghe Valley in China and the Tigris-Euphrates Valley in present-day Iraq. Both of those are the cradles of the first agricultural societies, and both of those societies cultivated industrial hemp among their first crops. In fact, there have been found in China shards of hemp twine embedded in pottery fragments in burial sites that are over 12,000 years old. So we know that hemp had already spread out of its indigenous area to China over 12,000 years ago and was being cultivated there at that time.
Have there been other governments that have banned hemp in the same way that the United States has banned hemp?
Well, the United States spearheaded it. And we spearheaded an international treaty back in 1961 called the Single Convention Treaty. And that required other governments to ban hemp and cannabis. And so because of signing that treaty, Nepal banned. They had hash stores all across Nepal until that ban went into effect in the early 70s. And China passed a law in the 60s to ban hemp, even though everyone there wears it and eats it. So there are other countries have matched those laws, and we've tried to implement in our Oregon Cannabis Tax Act a system of controls that are mandated by that for the sale of cannabis social inebriants, so to speak, or the psychoactive product of cannabis. But our Oregon Cannabis Tax Act's out there, and I urge you to support us. There's a way to donate to the political campaign. All of our donations go through this company, C&E Systems. They work as the reporting agents for Attorney General Kroger here in Oregon, our Oregon Attorney General, and Bill Bradbury's campaign. And most of the Democratic establishment uses C&E Systems to spearhead their financial reporting, so they stay in compliance with all the latest rules. You know, we're down to just less than 5 minutes left, but we'll take one last phone call here. Welcome to our show, caller. Hello.
Oh, hello. I'm still had the question about the industrial hemp there. So
go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, go right ahead.
I was just curious, in a natural setting here in Oregon, like. What would be the best? Is it Eastern Oregon more lend itself to that, or the coastal range? Or is it?
It'll grow everywhere. It'll produce more in the Willamette Valley because the topsoil's deeper. But it would be a very productive crop in Eastern Oregon, given the fact that it just produces more fiber, protein, and oil than any other crop out there.
Well, yeah, it makes great sense. You know, I mean.
And I couldn't quite understand that. Could you say that again?
It makes great sense to grow it. I mean, obviously,
yeah.
The products that come from it, and just the renewable factors involved, like just in paper alone, what would that do for?
According to the United States Department of Agriculture Bulletin 404, hemp, a waste product from making canvas and rope, lace and linen with hemp, the hemp hurd fiber, as opposed to the hemp bast fiber, which makes those products, canvas, rope, lace, and linen. Hemp hurd has been traditionally a waste product, and that makes more than 4 times more paper than trees. So this waste product from hemp fiber cultivation, bast fiber cultivation, makes more than 4 times more paper than the most productive tree species, according to the United States Department of Agriculture.
Oh, hey,
you know what? We're running out of time, so I want to thank you for that phone call. Our last online question says, if an acre of hemp produces 300 gallons of oil, how much biodiesel? Well, hemp seed oil can be used as biodiesel. It doesn't need any conversion, and diesel engines don't need conversion to run on vegetable oil. So any diesel engine, you can pour vegetable oil right into it, including hemp seed, which is 3 times more productive than other seed oil crops, and run your diesel engines without any conversion to diesel engines and without any conversion to the oil. And hemp seed oil can be made into anything that petroleum is made into without the toxic byproducts. It can be made into plastics, and can be made into fuels, can be made into gasoline, can be made into anything that, over 100,000 products. And so when we legalize marijuana, if we can put the Cannabis Tax Act petition on the ballot and legalize it this year, we will put Oregon on the cutting edge of exciting new economic developments. And I was quoted just this week in the Portland Tribune saying that we're going to make Oregon the Anheuser-Busch of cannabis, and we're going to be exporting cannabis products around the state, and that's going to cause a boom. Now tomorrow we have our Million Marijuana March. Here's last year's Million Marijuana March, and we look forward to seeing you down there at Pioneer Courthouse Square tomorrow. We'll be there by 11:30. We'll be down there starting at noon, and we'll be there till 4 in the afternoon.
We'll be from 10 to
Pioneer
5. 10 to 5.
Courthouse Square.
10 to 5.
Till 10 to 5. Okay, 10 to 5. So we look forward to seeing you down there. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing, Ann?
Thank you for having me with you tonight.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
I'm real happy that you can make it and give us a report on Jack's funeral. I want to thank all of you for watching. Tune in next week. We'll be live for many weeks to come here. And here is Mr. Tim Pate. Help us end adult marijuana prohibition and restore hemp. Good night.
See you next week, folks. Come out tomorrow. We'll have a march.